What makes Silicon Valley so special? The answer lies with a half-forgotten academic who broke the rules. In the early 20th century, California kept training brilliant electrical engineers who left for East Coast jobs. Dismayed by this brain drain, Stanford University professor Fred Terman broke with academic orthodoxy, which had preached keeping pure research separate from commerce. In 1939, he convinced two promising graduates to stay and start a company, providing them with funds and technical mentorship. William Hewlett and David Packard's garage-based venture, HP, became the Valley's defining startup and proof that this heresy worked. In the 1950s, Terman scaled his efforts, spearheading Stanford Industrial Park. The university-owned campus became home to General Electric, Kodak, and Lockheed, among other high-tech companies. In Terman's words, it created a community of technical scholars, where professors did consultancy work and engineers taught students. Well, that network has compounded over 70 years, and the resulting density of expertise powered Facebook, Netflix, and NVIDIA's long-term growth. In this final Disruption Week session, investment manager Brogan Harris from our Discovery team will explore some of today's rising Silicon Valley companies that continue to benefit from this advantage. And he'll answer the question, how do other US innovation hubs compare? Let's start. Well, these sessions run for 45 minutes. Brogan and I will be chatting for the first 30 or so, and then we'll take questions from you, the audience, for the last 15. We'd love to hear what you want to know, so please use the Ask a Question tab on your screen. Brogan, thanks for joining me. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Leo.
So Brogan, we've heard over the course of the week about innovative companies all over the world. But can you just expand on that opening narrative and tell me what you think makes Silicon Valley such an enduring success?
I think that's a great place to start, Leo, because I don't think there's a single reason why Silicon Valley exists and endures, but rather you have to think of it a bit like a system, where all these cogs are working together to help bring a business to life. So you have the amazing research institutions and universities like Stanford and Berkeley. And they're producing great research ideas. You have this rich network of venture capitalists and angel investors that help turn those ideas into startups. Lots of services and suppliers help scaling those startups then into commercial businesses, but they're all underpinned by a deep pool of talent. And that spans everything from semiconductor engineering to interdisciplinary fields like biotechnology and complex software development. So come together, form this sort of applied hub of synthesis, really, converting capital, talent, and ideas into fantastic businesses.
And I think we can bring up a map where we can see where some of those different clusters of companies are based. Brogan, can you just talk us through what we're seeing there?
Yeah, sure thing. So if you look down at the bottom of the map, so this is the Bay Area, and this travels from San Francisco up in the north, all the way down to San Jose in the south. So in the south here, we have a real density of semiconductor engineering companies. So we talk about this dense pool of talent, but there's also these sort of micro clusters. And here we have the likes of Broadcom, Marvell, NVIDIA. And then as we move up the Bay, we've got these sort of big technology companies, another focus on software development. And then also in San Francisco, that's where these sort of AI companies are based, likes of OpenAI and Anthropic. But we also have a biotechnology cluster in South San Francisco, and that extends all the way down then to Redwood City and Foster Bay. But you can, these little micro clusters, but that dense talent in each of them.
So what gives Baillie Gifford its edge in investing in these companies? Because there's no lack of American asset managers and venture capital firms also eyeing up Silicon Valley.
So look, I'm very thankful for the colleagues that have come before me and built a reputation for Baillie Gifford as a long-term, trusted and thoughtful investment partner. And that's opened a lot of doors for me, and I'm very thankful for that because, we might be based in Edinburgh, Leo, but we do spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley. I was there recently, a couple of months ago. I met with sort of 20 or so management teams, And these weren't sort of 30-minute calls or 30-minute meetings talking about last quarter's results. These were thinking about the long-term strategy, competitive positioning, that long-term vision. And again, it's like we might not be based in America, but we're there, we've got this reputation, and I think that helps us get to that insight.
And presumably that long-termism has got to be particularly useful for us in biotech, because you've got really long development cycles there, don't you?
Yeah, you have some very long development cycles. So, to take a drug from an idea to a commercial product can take decades, and it can cost up to $2 billion when accounting for failure, so a huge amount of money. And this pressures a lot of these biotechs and early stage companies to, maybe sell out to big pharma or to partner off their assets early. But we look for those companies, Leo, those rare companies with ambitious management teams and foundational science that are really going to, stand the test of time. So we invest in a company called Alnylam, which we've held for 14 years on the global discovery strategy. And this is a company with a very ambitious management team and a new type of science with RNAi and gene silencing, and they really pioneered that field. But I want to stress, those returns would only accrue if you kind of stood the test of time and held for those 14 years. And we've made 40 times our clients' capital there, long-term cycles.
I want to come back to biotech in a little bit, but maybe we can start looking at some of the companies that you've invested in by focusing on a company that maybe our audience will think of as more traditional Silicon Valley company. We heard earlier in the week from your colleague Robert Natzler in the private companies team about their investment in the AI lab Anthropic. Do you have any AI-related investments of your own?
Yeah, so Anthropic, hugely exciting, these large language model developers and foundational labs, but we cannot forget they are underpinned by physical infrastructure. So we've invested in a company called Astera Labs. So Astera Labs designs silicon chips to help with data center connectivity, data moving faster, more coordinated, and with greater integrity. So linking all those components together. And I think this is going to be foundational going forward as we scale the level of compute from the server to the rack level, connecting everything together. You can think of their chief product, a retimer, a bit like a Wi-Fi extender in your home. As data moves down these copper cables really quickly, the data begins to fade or the signal begins to fade. You need that retimer to clean it up and send it on like new. A bit like a Wi-Fi extender, boosts the range of your Wi-Fi in your house. So we're moving to these AI factories, scaling up the compute, and that's what Astera Labs does. Connectivity is their forte.
So you mentioned you were recently in Silicon Valley. Was this one of the companies you met with? And if so, what did you talk about?
Yeah, so I met with Astera Labs Chief Financial Officer, Mike Tate. No, this is a business growing like an absolute weed, Leo. So, 104% year over year, 20% incrementally between quarters. So you can imagine that puts a lot of growth strain on a company. And Mike Tate, he said, he'd hire 300 people tomorrow if he could. But they are very exacting customers, and this is very complex semiconductor engineering, so he doesn't want to lower that talent bar. And now being a public company and exhibiting the growth they're doing, they are beginning to attract the top talent in the industry.
So can I just understand this? The growth case for this company is we're all going to want to use more AI, so you're going to need more data centers, they're going to need to be faster as well, and therefore there's going to be growing demand over time for these retimers, is that right?
Yeah, so Astera, they produce retimers, switches, active electrical cables, and they all help knit these data centers together, greater connectivity. But they also integrate this hardware with software. So their software platform called Cosmos, you can imagine all these bits of hardware spread throughout the entire data center, and they're beaming data back to this platform called Cosmos, which allows operators to see the health of their data center. Is the GPUs heating up? Is there data bottlenecks? And it helps them solve those problems and help get that AI factory productivity up and running again.
Got it. So this is a hardware company that's added a software layer, and that gives extra value to its customers. Do you have anything that's more software-centric in your portfolio too?
So we talked a little bit about AI now, and it's making businesses rethink their products and their go-to-market. And there's a structural change happening, but one of the companies we're hugely excited about is a company called Amplitude. So this is a digital analytics platform. And this allows companies to understand how their users interact with their website and applications. So, me and you, Leo, we might log onto a website, but we might navigate it in a very different way. And Amplitude helps understand that data, test different versions of the website, and ultimately optimize for better conversion and retention, so better economics for their customers.
So where could this go?
So this is the interesting bit, is they've developed these AI agents, which are kind of always on, and then combing through billions of data points 24/7, and that helps surface more insights. And I think going forward, we talked about logging onto this website and navigating it differently, but maybe we move on to these websites and they're personalized to us. We might look at a website and have a different typeface, a different organizational layer, and that helps me and you work through that website or have a better experience. And that's why I think we're going personalized websites. I think Amplitude's data and the way they analyze it could be in a good position to power that future.
That's really interesting, hugely ambitious. But
Yeah.
Amplitude does have competition in the sector. You've got Google Analytics, you've got Adobe, two very deep-pocketed firms with their own AI expertise. So what gives Amplitude the right to succeed against the like of that competition?
So Amplitude is a founder-run company by Spencer Skates. And this is a company with an undeniable focus on product analytics or digital analytics. And I think this has allowed them to move with a lot of agility. When this AI paradigm came, Spencer Skates was out there. He invested in 4 other companies, brought them in, built this AI agents team, and now they're going to be first to market with this. So they might not be the same size, but they don't have those distractions, 100% focus. And I think that's really starting to play now because you see the growth reaccelerating in this business. And it's been on a bit of a journey. It came to market around $6.5 billion in 2021. And now we invested at around $1.4 billion. But Spencer's still there. He's still got the backing of the board, and he's still got that long-term vision. And when I spoke to the president, Thomas Hansen, he said it was that adaptability, that resilience, and that vision which really brought him on board. So these founder-run companies, very important, speed and agility in which they can move.
So that's a very resilient and battle-hardened leader there. I want to move on to biotech. Before we talk about some of the companies, this is an area you've got particular expertise, isn't it?
Yeah, so before coming to Baillie Gifford, I did a PhD in something called bioinformatics. So this is combining sort of computer science to address biological problems. I was modeling DNA and protein changes through time. And I think what it's allowed me to do really is kind of get up to speed with that science a bit faster. So when I'm analyzing a biotechnology company, I think understanding that science so I can make use of that scarce time that we have with management team. Instead of kind of getting a teaching on what they do, I'm talking about that long-term vision, competitive position, and really what they're trying to do. And I think that's what kind of gives me a bit of an edge here.
That's a good advantage to have. Can you tell me then, maybe give me an example of one of the biotech companies you've invested in Silicon Valley?
So we've invested in a company called Twist Biosciences. This isn't your traditional biotech in that they don't make a therapeutic. What they make is synthetic DNA. And this can then be used in advanced therapies like gene therapy, mRNA, and also advanced diagnostics. So we're talking about printing DNA, not just reading it here. And this is a company which has automated the entire process from their silicon chip, where they print this DNA on a nanowell level, all the way through to delivering it to customers. And we think this is going to be foundational to how this industry evolves long term. I
just want to make sure our audience absolutely get what this company's doing. I think we can bring up a visualization that shows Twist's chip-based solution on the one side, and on the other you've got what is the traditional lab testing plate. Can you just explain to us what the difference is between the two?
Sure thing. So on the right we have the 96 well plate. And if you've spent any time in a biology lab, you'll see loads of these lying about. But you can imagine there's sort of 96 individual reactions that can happen on that plate. But on the left, we have Twist's silicon chip, and this has millions of wells in it. And you can imagine that they can print DNA into all of these wells and do millions of simultaneous reactions all at once. So the scale difference from 96 up to 1 million, you can see how Twist has a structural cost advantage and have really pushed forward the industry.
And can you give us an idea of a practical application of this then?
So I don't want to take a too somber tone here, Leo, but imagine you've had cancer and you've gone through that terrible process and you've had your tumor removed. With Twist technology, you can sequence that tumor and make a personalized diagnostic to it. So you can test whether that cancer has been completely gone after your surgery or whether it's come back much faster than traditional means like scans. So we're talking about better outcomes for patients here with personalized medicine.
So Twist isn't kind of giving the therapies that are being used in the hospitals. As you said, it's the company that provides the technologies for others to use, a picks and shovels play, if you like, for DNA-based diagnostics. But can we see this type of technology actually being used with real patients today to give us confidence that it works?
So yeah, we are seeing DNA-based diagnostics being developed, and one of the companies we invested in is called Guardant Health. And they started with a mission to conquer cancer with data. And they pioneered the field of liquid biopsy. So this is the ability to test for cancer and help guide therapy based off a single vial of blood or a couple of vials of blood. And they started in late stage cancer, but as their technology has got better and more sensitive, they've moved down that continuum, and now they have a diagnostic to screen for colorectal cancer. So this is just a once every couple of years test, catch it early where the outcomes are better.
So that's great. So we know that this works then. Brogan, all of these Silicon Valley-based companies that we've been talking about up till now, they're all highly disruptive, but some of them are, I guess, at a fairly early stage on their journey. So they could become really big, but there's a risk that they could also fail in their missions. From our clients' point of view, they're not investing in individual companies, they're investing in portfolios that you build. So can you give me a little bit of an idea how you think about risk when you're building those portfolios?
We understand that not all of our companies are going to work out, Leo, because they're inherently pushing the envelope of technology and there is science risk there. But what we do is build a globally diversified portfolio of these companies, the likes of Amplitude from software, Twist from biotechnology, for example, lots of different sectors, different geographies. But we also only build up our stake in these companies as they go through significant de-risking events. So as they progress their technology, then we begin to add. So globally diversified and also risk aware.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be going to audience questions soon, so if you'd like to pose one, please do use the Ask a Question tab on your screen. So Brogan, it feels like we've established that Silicon Valley is a great place to go looking for exceptional companies, but I want to move on to maybe other innovation hubs in the US. Can you tell me about another one?
So a place where I spend a lot of time is Boston. So Boston's got some fantastic universities, right? Harvard, MIT, the Broad Institute as well, and also some very specialist venture capital firms like Third Rock and Atlas Ventures. And Boston then is fantastic for biotech companies and STEM businesses, and there's a real ecosystem there.
So tell me about one of the companies that we're invested in over there.
So we invested in a company called Beam Therapeutics. Their office is right in the heart of Boston on Kendall Square, which was termed the most innovative square mile in the world. And they developed a technology called base editing. It's the ability to go into a patient and precisely edit their DNA to combat genetic linked diseases. One of the programs they've got is in sickle cell disease, which a mutation in the DNA, I think it's an A to a T, causes red blood cells to go into these sickle cell shaped, and therefore they don't last as long. They also block the capillaries and blood vessels. It can be really painful. And with their therapy, they're able to go in and tweak a part of the DNA to combat that mutation and produce more of the natural red blood cells. And this is more of a cure than a treatment. So it's a fantastic technology and really interesting.
So that sounds like it could be a total game changer, coming up with cures for diseases like sickle cell rather than just treating them as chronic conditions, and something that you would think would be incredibly valuable. So what is it that we're appreciating about this company that the market hasn't fully baked in yet?
So we're still early in this technology in the sense that it's going through clinical trials as we speak, but what we also, it's a lot of uncertainty around the business model here, right? We talked about that massive cost to develop a drug, but if you're a one-time cure, how do you price that? And, how do you get interact with the patients, the insurers, the government, everything to ensure that, Beam are being paid a fair price for their development, but also patients are getting the drug and having, the great outcome that it might bring. So there's lots of uncertainty there. But after speaking to John Evans, the CEO, and Giuseppe Caramella, the president, the amount of thought they put onto the science was incredible, but also they've done a lot of thought on this strategy and how they're going to integrate it into the ecosystem. And right now, the value of this company is really being based on their lead programs in sickle cell and antitrypsin deficiency. But genetic diseases, ones are caused by mutations like this, around 58% of genetic diseases. So this could be applied across lots of different therapeutics. And we think that potential's there. But again, it's only going to accrue to those who are willing to stay the course and be that long-term investor.
And I'm just curious, when you're going to Boston, how well do these companies know about Baillie Gifford? Do they know who we are?
Yeah, so we talked about that investment in Alnylam and being invested in Boston for nearly 2 decades now, and people have been traveling there for longer than that from Baillie Gifford. I was recently in a meeting where the head of R&D kind of came in and introduced himself and said, I've spoken to your colleague when I was at Alnylam. The chief operating officer was from a company called Argenix, which we invest in. And he'd come over and came to introduce himself and joined the meeting. So, people do inherently move. And I think we've got that reputation as a long-term, trusted and thoughtful investor. And, that's spreading across Boston.
Okay, I want to, before we go to the audience questions, I want to visit one more innovation hub if we can, and maybe something that's not to do with biotech.
Yeah.
Can you pick another one out for us?
So I think one hub that maybe doesn't get as much attention as the other two is Long Beach. So this is, a couple of 100 miles south of Silicon Valley. And it's becoming pardon the pun here, the center of gravity for the space businesses. So you have the likes of Boeing that were in the area, a lot of military, and SpaceX has manufacturing there, and also a company called Rocket Lab, which we invested in this year. So Rocket Lab is an end-to-end space business. They have a small launch rocket called the Electron, but they also build satellites and software to help the full end-to-end of this industry. It's founded by a remarkable founder called Peter Beck in New Zealand back in 2006. So he's been at this for some time, but he ended up moving the business, or the headquarters of this business, to Long Beach to tap into that talent.
And I think we can show our audience one of their rockets being tested at their HQ in California. Just tell us a little bit about what we're seeing there. That looks really impressive.
So this is actually the Archimedes engine that's going to power their larger Neutron rocket that's going to be taking around 13,000 kilograms to orbit. And what we see is a really clean burn of the engine. And that's because they use a liquid oxygen and methane combination rather than the traditional kerosene RP1. And the reason being is that this rocket is designed from the ground up to be reusable. So that clean burn means they don't have to do extensive refurbishment in between each launch. So that's, again, it's factoring into that reusability.
And tell us a little bit more about the founder, Sir Peter Beck, because he's quite a character, isn't he?
Yes, to say the least. So he's kind of a self-taught engineer, and he was building rockets since an early age. I think he even strapped one to a bike and rode it, a rocket bike. But after speaking to a lot of people in the industry, everyone came out with the same consensus that he is one of the best engineers in this space. And he's really pioneered this business. And it's one of those stories of resilience, but also ambition. And now he's here building this end-to-end space company.
There is, of course, another very resilient, ambitious founder who's involved in space with Elon Musk and our investment in SpaceX. So do you think that there's really space in the market, or the pun for 2 rocket launch companies?
Look, I think we're very early here, and this is potentially $1 trillion market within the next decade. And we're talking about opening up the extraterrestrial economy. So I would challenge you, Leo, to name another $1 trillion market with only one player in it. This is ultimately going to open up over the next couple of years. And both these companies, I think, have a very good shot of being a major player in this economy.
Excellent, Brogan. That's all my questions. I want to turn to the audiences now, if I can. Okay, so Brogan, the first one here is from a field that we haven't really discussed at all. How far progressed is quantum computing? Because we have an investment in one of the companies in the sector, don't we?
Indeed. So we have an investment in a company called PsiQuantum, which is using kind of silicon photonics to underpin their quantum technology. And we think this is a hugely exciting area. And look, this technology at the moment, it's not scaled as large as classical computing, but it is on the way. And what's really interesting about quantum is that there's some areas that are kind of data starved, talking about drug discovery and possibly material science. And with quantum, you can do huge amounts of parallel processing all at once, and maybe explore these areas with deep parameter space. So we think this is hugely exciting. It's not quite as far along as classical computing. It's definitely in the pipeline.
And I know there's some people who think that if you mix quantum computing and AI together, they could both supercharge each other. So definitely interesting. Question here about energy. You were talking earlier about the investment in data center related company, but this is asking, are you looking at any companies providing the power to data centers?
So, these data centers are scaling to a massive size, and they're taking multi-gigawatts of power. Some on the scale of 2 gigawatts. That's the same amount that powers the city of Chicago. So we're talking now about a possible bottleneck in power. We invest in a company called IREN, formerly known as Iris Energy, and they had a thesis, I think 7 years ago now, that the digital age is scaling faster than the physical that was underpinning it. So they locked up lots of land and power and started building these high-performance data centers. So they have one of the largest power portfolios in the world, 3 gigawatts. So, this is where we think a bottleneck's going to come, but we've invested accordingly.
Fascinating. So definitely exposure there. Next one, what are the key factors you look for in rapid scaling ability?
So I tend to look for companies, again, that's really solving a problem for their customers, right? If there's an unmet need in the market, and that unmet need is large, you can see a path to a business that it has that magnitude in front of it. We also look for businesses which are very efficient on their capital and able to redeploy it efficiently and then scale that business into that opportunity. And I think that has to be underpinned, though, by a management team. I prefer looking for founder companies which have that resilience and that ambition to really scale that business and execute into that market.
Okay, I've got a question here. I'm going to interpret it my own way. The question is with NVIDIA. I'm going to take that to mean, what is the potential if NVIDIA manages to keep cranking out these chips and they keep getting faster and faster? What unlock is there for the smaller types of scale-ups that you focus on?
So we talked about this idea of the AI factory, and I think that's fundamentally, we're looking at a difference between these traditional data centers and the ability of these factories to act as one single computer. So NVIDIA is phenomenal at not just providing these AI chips, but actually providing a lot of the networking and creating these pods and clusters. But that opens up also, as you said, opportunities for smaller companies to play a specific role in knitting together these AI data centers, whether that's networking like Astera Labs or cooling or other parts of the case. But then it's that scaling of those data centers, ability to go to the next layer of intelligence. So we're not there yet, but I think super intelligence and incredible models that will aggregate all of human knowledge, they are coming.
Okay, and this is Disruption Week, so here's a question about disruption. Which areas of the value chain are most risk from disruption, in your view?
So I think, it depends on the value chain here, but I think one of the areas that's at risk of disruption is owning the customer in software. And I think you have to have a very unique position in the stack, either have a unique proprietary data set or be part of the fundamental infrastructure, how that company accesses its customer, right? Because the likes of Anthropic and OpenAI, people are spending more time in these sort of chat interfaces rather than searching, rather than navigating customer websites. So you have to be at the forefront of that. Something like Amplitude, which is helping these companies compete and interact their websites for better experiences.
Okay. You mentioned earlier about your own expertise in biotech. There's a question saying a lot of the areas where you and your team invest in are hard science. So how do you build up in-house skills to make judgments about the companies that you invest in?
I know we are all generalist investors, but at Baillie Gifford, we don't have sector analysts, and we're not covering 20, 30 companies. So, when I get excited about something, I do have the license to kind of dig deep and build my expertise in an area. So, I spent 2 months looking at data center networking, really speaking to a lot of experts, academics, analysts in this space, and building up that picture and building up that deep understanding of an area. And I think there's a couple of us now, who come from maybe a scientific background, we're getting together, talking about science, and sort of building our knowledge in that area as well.
Question about process. How do you agree in your team on whether to invest in a stock? Is it a matter of one investor making the case and everybody voting on it, or do you all have to have unanimous agreement?
So we don't have to have unanimous agreement. So we have a portfolio construction group, but we have to have two sponsors of a company. So someone who's championing it, and then someone who's also willing to sponsor it. And that gives us, we have that long-term mindset, but it's also to keep us on track with our thesis and, to counteract some of the emotional biases we see in investing.
And how does that work when you decide to sell?
So, for example, if that second sponsor removes their sponsorship, you have to find another sponsor in the PCG, or you have to move on from that company. And ultimately, that's something we have to do.
And so there was an acronym you gave there. What does that stand for?
Portfolio Construction Group.
Thank you. Okay, a question on Rocket Labs. What's the usefulness of 24-hour preparedness or turnaround that Rocket Labs aims to develop at its launch pads?
So a lot of the customers, right, for Rocket Labs, if you think about their Electron rocket, it's 300 kilograms to orbit, but think of it a bit like an Uber. It is precise and it's on your time frame. So lots of companies, they want to launch a satellite, see their path, and then launch another satellite directly after it. So it's that path-finding mission. So doing it back 24 hours at a time, that fast turnaround, Rocket Lab are able to deliver for their customer. It also allows them to sort of ameliorate their fixed costs of that launch pad. So it's better economics for them, but also more precise for their customer.
And can you just, while we're on the topic, can you just spell out the difference between what they're doing and what SpaceX are doing?
Yeah. So with Rocket Lab, at the moment, they have designed the Electron rocket, and this is, you can think of it like, we talked about it like an Uber. That's because it's on the customer's time and it's precisely to the location which that customer wants to go with their satellite. With SpaceX, for example, their Falcon rocket, or their larger one, customers tend to do something called a ride share, where lots of satellites from different companies are on the same rocket, and it goes to a location in space, which is not really their precise location they want to go to. They need to travel through it then. So you can think of SpaceX a bit like the train, Rocket Lab like an Uber.
Another question here on process. We've discussed in this session and across the week about how picky Baillie Gifford is about the companies that it puts in the portfolios. I'm being asked, what's the common reasons why you would not invest in a stock?
For us on our strategy, I think it's chiefly, are they solving a problem for their customers? And do they have an emerging competitive advantage, which means they're going to be able to defend that market once they've solved that problem and begun to grow it? So we look for those companies, again, solving products, have an emerging edge, and also have that scalable business model. Because ultimately, we want to hold companies for a long time. And we want to see them grow and compound as they utilize their technology. So we don't tend to invest if that edge we feel is weak and they don't have that magnitude of that opportunity ahead of them. How
about culture? Because I know we talk a lot about culture. It's sometimes, do you see kind of the case today looking fairly good, but you have deep concerns about the leadership or other issues within the company culture?
So I think everyone has a different preference here, but I tend to look for founder-run companies, but particularly with CEOs or leaders which have shown a lot of adaptability and resilience. Because ultimately, we're talking about pushing the envelope of technology a lot of the time here, and things do go wrong, and there are these drawdowns in the company. So it's those leaders which have shown that adaptability, shown that resilience, we can trust to go the test of time.
Okay. Question here, what do you think UK companies can learn from the Silicon Valley example?
For me, it's ambition. And I think when you go to Silicon Valley or you go to these ecosystem hubs like Boston, there's a huge amount of ambition to scale these businesses past that initial startup and IP generation. So
IP, intellectual property.
Intellectual, yeah. So for UK biotechs, for example, I think to have that ambition to really drive and become a fully integrated company with a research and commercial organization and commercialize those drugs themselves and keep the value in the UK and grow that business then, rather than selling out the business early.
And we've talked very much about US innovation clusters, but are there any innovation clusters outside the US that you would want to highlight, bearing in mind that Discovery Team and indeed Baillie Gifford generally is not just investing in the US?
Yeah, we are global investors, global discovery. And I recently went on a trip to China where I visited Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and you're beginning to see these clusters form there. So in Beijing, there was amazing electric vehicle companies. And down in Shanghai and Suzhou, there was an emerging biotech scene. So we're seeing these clusters form. Maybe they're not quite as far along as Silicon Valley, but I really think that's where we're going to see some really amazing talent hubs.
How would you describe the difference between those innovation hubs in China and the US? Because presumably they'll have different characteristics.
Yeah, I said they're quite early on in their development there, but they are beginning to scale. And, the ambition in China is palpable. I went to one area outside Shanghai that was doing, there was a med tech company there that we've been looking at. And the scale of the industry that they're building, we're building nearly an entire city with suppliers and sister companies all in the same area. So again, it's not quite there yet, but we are going on that journey. So.
Okay, I have a related question here. Do you think any of the Chinese or other innovation clusters could ever challenge Silicon Valley's supremacy as an innovation hub?
I think time will tell, but I think the ambition is surely there, and the scale and the talent as well that we're seeing in China is staggering. So I'd never say never.
Excellent, Brogan. That's a lot of audience questions that we managed to cover. Thank you very much. Well, we didn't have time to answer all of the questions you sent in, though, but we will aim to respond to some of those that we didn't get to on our Disruption Week website. Details of that coming up in a moment. But Brogan, with the remaining time, I wonder whether you could pull some of the thoughts and themes of this discussion together and leave our audience with a closing thought.
So I believe the best entrepreneurs want to be surrounded by like-minded individuals and give their business, their baby Leo, the best chance of success. And that's why I think dense talent hubs and ecosystems like Silicon Valley and Boston exist, right? It's where the action is. They're the windows to the future, and the best just gravitate to them. That's why the likes of Spencer Skates and Emily LaProust from Twist base their businesses in Silicon Valley and follow in the path that Terman helped laid all those years ago. At Baillie Gifford, we seek to invest in the next wave of progress in technology and alongside these generational entrepreneurs. So we have to be attuned to the importance of these ecosystems, adept at accessing them, and build trust with these generational founders. And I believe we can do that, Leo, because the reputation we've built up over decades, not quarters, of being a long-term, thoughtful, and trusted investment partner. And I believe that comes together to help us execute on our core task, which is to drive returns for our clients.
Excellent, Brogan. That's a great final thought to end this on. Thank you so much for taking part.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our final topic for this Disruption Week. I hope you've enjoyed this and the past day's events. If you missed any of the sessions or just want to recap what was said, you'll find details of the other Europe, emerging markets, and private companies events at bailliegifford.com/Disruption Week. We'll shortly add a write-up of this conversation too, as well as answers to some of the questions that we didn't get to. If you have suggestions for future Disruption Week topics, please get in touch with your client contact or email us at disruptionweek@bailliegifford.com. And if you haven't already done so, please also check out our podcast, Short Briefings on Long-Term Thinking, where I quiz our investment managers throughout the year. I had to get a plug in for that. But for now, that's it. Thank you and goodbye.